Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that, let's be honest, everyone is curious about, but it's incredibly tough to get good data on. Sex. We're going to dig into the numbers, try to separate what's real from what's just noise, and you might be surprised by the story they tell.
So where do you even start? Well, how about with a question that sounds simple but is actually really tricky? What even is sex? You'd think the answer would be obvious, but the way you define it can have, let's just say, massive consequences. It even became a global issue for a US president. You see, this very famous denial, it all came down to the precise definition of sexual relations. And just like that, a private matter exploded into a public debate about statistics and definitions. It really highlights the first big problem in getting reliable numbers. We have to agree on what we're actually counting. And it turns out, this wasn't just some clever political wordplay. A study of U.S. college students back in 1991 found that a huge number, 60% of them, also believed that oral sex did not count as having sex. I mean, that really raises a huge question, right? If people have such different definitions, how can we possibly measure any of this accurately?
This whole problem with definitions leads us right to the main event. How do we find out what's really happening behind closed doors? Because all the usual scientific methods for gathering data, they pretty much fall apart when you try to apply them to the bedroom.
I mean, just think about it. The most purely scientific approach would be direct observation. But putting cameras in people's bedrooms is, not only ethically horrifying, and let's be real, probably incredibly boring most of the time, it's also just guaranteed to fail for a very specific scientific reason.
And that reason is something called the Hawthorne effect. It's the simple idea that the second people know you're watching them, their behavior changes completely. Maybe they get stage fright, maybe they decide to put on a show. Either way, whatever you record isn't real life anymore. The data becomes totally useless.
Okay, so watching people is out. That means we have to rely on asking them, through surveys. But this is where the real detective work has to start. Because as you're about to see, not all surveys are created equal. You have to learn how to spot the believable numbers and how to spot the bogus ones.
So let's compare two very different approaches. On one hand, you have Britain's NATSL survey. This thing is the gold standard. It's expensive, it uses rigorous random sampling to get a real picture of the population. But on the other hand, you have something like the famous Height report from the 70s. It just sent out questionnaires to volunteer groups and got a tiny 4.5% of them back.
And that right there is the fatal flaw. Think about it. The kind of person who eagerly fills out a super detailed sex survey and mails it back probably isn't the same as the average person. It's what statisticians call self-selection bias, and it can lead to some truly wild, headline-grabbing claims that just don't reflect reality at all. For example, the Height report famously claimed that 70% of women who'd been married for over 5 years were having affairs. I mean, wow, that is a shocking number that sold a ton of books. But it's a direct result of those flawed methods, not a true picture of society.
All right, so let's do this. Let's ignore the bogus numbers from the biased surveys and focus only on the best, most reliable data we have. What does it actually tell us about sex in the modern world? Well, the answer is probably not what you're thinking.
So what does that gold standard data actually show? Something pretty surprising. You hear all these stories about our hypersexualized culture, but the NATSL surveys show a steady decline in how often people are having sex. In just 10 years, between 2000 and 2010, the median for couples dropped from 5 times a month to just 4.
So, what's going on here? You might think, okay, maybe it's just that the spark fades in long-term relationships. And sure, the data shows that's part of it. But the decline is happening across the board. Something about modern life itself seems to be getting in the way.
Well, the researchers who crunch these numbers, they point to the insane pressures of modern life. We have more demands on our time than ever before. We're tethered to work emails and social media, even when we're in bed. As one of the lead researchers put it, very bluntly, a lot of people are just totally knackered. And that trend was captured perfectly by the headlines when the 2013 results came out. It seems like our digital lives are just crowding out our intimate lives, leaving us with less time and less energy for our partners.
Okay, look, this is all pretty fascinating stuff, but let's take a step back. Beyond just being curious, why does any of this actually matter? Why should we care so much about sorting the good data from the bad and getting these numbers right?
Well, it's actually essential. For one, public health officials absolutely rely on this kind of data to plan services and track the spread of infections. It also helps us understand these huge shifts in our society and relationships over time. And for you and me, It's about media literacy. It arms us so we can question the next crazy, sensational headline from some bogus survey.
But this all brings us to a final, really important point. For all the data we can possibly collect, numbers have their limits. They can count how often, but they can't measure desire. They can track trends across millions of people, but they can't capture the messy, complicated human experiences of love or disappointment or connection. In this age of big data, maybe the most important thing these numbers show us is everything that they can never, ever explain.